Hi, I'm Reverend Eric Sword. I'm the Executive Director of Wesley College Foundation, a nonprofit supporting education in Tanzania, and specifically Wesley College in Mwanza, Tanzania. I'm excited that you're with us today as we get to have a conversation about the United Methodist Church in Africa. I first went to Tanzania in 2010 and spent 2 years as a volunteer and 8 years as a missionary with Global Ministries, during which time I was blessed to be part of the team that started Wesley College in Mwanza, Tanzania. And I'm excited to be able to bring this conversation about the United Methodist Church in Africa and the church in Africa to you today. With me, and the one that's going to be providing most of our information and talking today is Reverend Bonface Wanyama. And Bonface, if you can introduce yourself as well.
Thank you. I'm Reverend Bonface Wanyama. I'm a pastor in the United Methodist Church. I'm a Kenyan by nationality, but currently I serve and stay in Tanzania, where I serve as the head of the Department of Theology at Wesley College. Thank you.
So we wanted to start today by first giving some reference for those that may be new to Africa and to the United Methodist Church in Africa. Africa itself is a continent of 54 countries, individual nations, all with their own cultures and personalities, governments, advantages and challenges. It's the second largest continent on Earth, and is the second most populated continent on Earth, with a population of 1.3 billion people, which is about 4 times the size of North America. On this continent of Africa, the United Methodist Church has 13 Episcopal areas, 33 annual conferences, and over 7 million United Methodists, compared to the about 6.2 million United Methodists that are here in the U.S. And so one of the reasons that we feel like this is an important conversation to be having is because of the strength, the size, and the impact that the United Methodist Church in Africa is going to have on the worldwide United Methodist Church going forward. So it's definitely something we in the U.S. Need to be paying attention to, not just because, and I don't say that just because I was a missionary there and because I spent 10 years of my life there, but because of the people I met and the faith-filled churches and Christians that I met there that are doing God's work in a different part of the world. Just a quick disclaimer before we get started is that today we're excited to have Bonface with us. We're excited to hear his views on the church in Africa and the United Methodist Church in Africa. These don't necessarily reflect any particular Episcopal area and should not be taken as comments that cover the entire continent of Africa. It's a diverse place with diverse opinions. But we're excited about the conversation that we're going to have tonight is relevant to the two of us and to all of you that are joining us. So Bonface, just kind of some introductory questions talking about the church in Africa. What role does the church play in society in Africa?
Thank you. Yes, I want to again confirm what Reverend Eric has just said, that Africa is not a monolithic context, that Africa is so diverse to an extent that even as I speak right here, I'm wondering whether I'm in a position to represent Africa. But yes, back to your question, the church in Africa is informed by the African philosophy. What I mean by that is that in Africa, African spirituality is so much intertwined to the daily life of the people. So much so that it becomes difficult for you to draw a line between the spirituality of the people and the normal life of the people. So the church therefore becomes sort of a moral compass. It orders the life of the people. It guides the society and the daily lives of the people. So the church stands at the center to play the role of, yes, that's the word, the moral compass of the society. Yes.
So would you say with that the church is an organization or an entity that is fairly well respected in Africa? And how does that affect maybe your work as a pastor as well?
Yeah, the church in Africa has taken over the role that was played by the African, let me say, elders. In traditional Africa, the responsibility of ordering the morals and the values of the society lay in the hands of the elders. And today now, we have seen a transition from that particular context to what we have now, where the church now stands as that moral compass, where everyone would see the church as now the one that is providing that function or that role. As a pastor today, a pastor or a church leader has a very important standing in the society. So much so that if there is a challenge in the society, you are the last person that people would run onto, people would want you to offer solutions to some of those moral and questions and be able to guide the values in the society.
So, just for those of us maybe not familiar with the context or not familiar with what that may look like, how does that translate to the day-to-day life of the people? What does in a given week, how would somebody be interacting with the church? What are the multitude of ways in which somebody might interact with the church or with their pastor or with their Christian community during the week?
Yeah, I sometimes teach African theology, and some of the African authors are in agreement that the African people are notoriously religious. They live their religion, they exercise their religion everywhere. So in Africa, even when I was coming in here, I was wondering whether this is a church where people come for worship on Sunday. Because in Africa, a worship service begins in the morning until evening. So people are very much engaged in the church. And that does not mean that other days people are not involved with the work of the church. Because of the daily lives of the people that are sometimes their schedules are so busy, they do not have time for very consistent interactions with the church activities. But despite that, people are continually connected to the pastor and the church leaders and each other. With the advancement now of telecommunication, if a member of the church has a problem, they would call the pastor, they would call their friends. So the daily life of a member of or a Christian in Africa is sort of, I'm looking for the word to use here, very much engaged in making sure that they are connected and they are seeking solutions from their pastor and from the church leader.
So, given that that so much of people's lives are intertwined with their church, with their pastor, with their spiritual life, obviously that makes the development of the church an extremely important task. So how would you describe, or where do you feel like the United Methodist Church in Africa is in its growth and development, its ability to reach and minister to people?
Yeah, I think you will agree with me that the church in Africa, and in this particular context, the United Methodist Church, is experiencing a very rapid growth in membership. Just in your opening statement, you did mention that we are now around 7 million people, 7 million membership on the continent of Africa. That's very right, that there is a very rapid growth in terms of membership, and that means a lot of other things. That one of them is that there is currently a very steady focus on things like evangelism that ensures that the church grows. There's a very steady focus on things like discipleship, growing disciples in the church, and so on.
Well, I think that kind of in some ways leads me to my next question. Hearing you talk about the growth of the church, the expansion of membership, the focus on, especially on evangelism and on discipleship. In the United Methodist Church in the U.S. right now, there's a large conversation around where the church is going to go in the future, and specifically the splintering that's kind of taking place within the United Methodist Church right now. But I didn't necessarily hear that as one of the focuses of the United Methodist Church in Africa. Would you, and we tend to use labels like United Methodist, Global Methodist, conservative, traditional versus progressive, or centrist. Are these conversations that are happening in the local church in Africa right now? What does that look like?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for us in Africa, some of us who have the advantage of interacting with global literature, that is, you can read and you can go on social platform, are able to read about that. But an average United Methodist in Africa is focused on different things, because the conversations in the church or in the local church are very much informed by the context. The context in Africa is completely different from what we hear and what we read, at least from this particular context. African conversations revolves around the challenges that are in Africa. And so those labels, like conservative, like liberal, you would really struggle to be able to explain them to an average African United Methodist, what actually they mean. An average African member is a Christian, is a United Methodist Christian. Those labels as conservatives and liberals are not there.
So if that's not part of the conversation right now, especially in the local church in Africa, and if those are not maybe necessarily even the conversations that leaders are having when they talk specifically about the church in Africa, not the worldwide church, but the church in that context, what is the conversation right now then around the future of the United Methodist Church there in Africa? What does that look like?
What is also important to note is that United Methodist Church is a connectional church. And what happens anywhere also affects a number of things. That is to say that even the conversation that is going on about the split of the church and the GMC and so on is a conversation that Africans are listening, but not to say that it informs their conversation. If there is going to be effects on the part of the Africans, it is not going to be because they are conservatives or they are liberals. It is just going to be because we are part of the global connection, and there is a conversation and there are things that are happening in the connection. And so we are affected in one way or the other. Yeah.
So I know recently there's been a lot of statements being made specifically around the church in Africa, and that have prompted a lot of conversation here in the U.S. and possibly, I would imagine, some conversation there, and makes it look like this is a hot topic in Africa, on the continent, and for the United Methodist Church there. How did these kind of things, where do they stem from? If it's not a conversation kind of going on in the local church right now, is it simply a connectional conversation, or are there other places from which some of this stems on the continent itself?
Well, like I said, yes, we are a connectional organization. And conversations in the connection will always trickle down to other regions. This conversation about the split and so on is a conversation in Africa that has been kept at the top. And so what you read from the leaders, whether the bishops have said that or this other reform group has said that, but it's not a conversation where you will find in the local church. So, I might not be adequately in a position to explain further what is happening. I have read the statements and the counter statements that are being put out there. But what I know is that those conversations are just, some of them in those bulletins or on social media, but they are not conversations that are very much in the pews or in the local churches on the continent, at least from what I know.
So, as somebody, and from the time that we have worked together at Wesley College and the time that we have spent together, especially trying to explore and having conversations, when we first started with Wesley College, many conversations about what was needed to adequately prepare pastors. Over and over again, we kept coming back kind of to that question of specifically, what do we need to be doing to educate pastors for ministry in the local church? That was our focus from day one. I think 5 years into Wesley College's existence, it's still the question that we primarily ask ourselves, what do we need to be doing to prepare pastors for ministry in the local church and in their local communities? With that in mind, and knowing that that's your focus and that's where your heart is there a beneficial direction within maybe the larger connection? Is there a beneficial direction that churches in Africa could move? Is there a beneficial structure or strategy that would strengthen the United Methodist Church in Africa at this time and kind of within the current context and discussion?
Yeah, I think your question was what can we do? Or
so keeping in mind that that we really want to focus on the local church.
Yes.
As you said, there's an upper level conversation, but our focus has always been on the local church. Mm-hmm. So focusing on the local church, is there something that could happen on a broader scale that would be beneficial to the local church? Keeping in mind that there are conversations going on outside of that scope on a higher level that maybe is outside of our ability to discuss right now. But what are some things that could happen within the United Methodist Church today that would be beneficial to the local church in Africa?
I think for me, what is important is to respect and understand context. If we are talking about the local church, we are talking about Africa, where the membership of the church and the church is growing. And so there is that need for resourcing the church in terms of training the human resource, both clergy and other people in other areas. So even as we look at developing the church and resourcing the church, it is very important to respect and understand those different contexts. And so the church at the global level plugs in by understanding that we need to be, I've heard this English word, I don't know whether it makes sense, apolitical, without taking this side or the other side, but focusing on ministry and understanding the context in the current context in Africa and the need for us to be able to energize what is happening, to be able to resource and develop the local ministries.
And do you think that that's something, based on the worldwide conversation that you're following, do you feel like the the worldwide United Methodist Church is genuinely interested and is working on understanding the context? Are there ever times when you feel like, as a leader in the church, and while you may not be an Episcopal leader or on that level, you do provide leadership through education and other roles that you play. Do you feel like people are paying attention to the local context in Africa, or is there something that we're missing there?
I will genuinely tell you that I am one of the people who, for a long period of time, have been very disappointed with what is happening in this connection. I have seen a lot of resources channeled to very unhelpful causes. We have spent a lot of resources in boardrooms discussing issues that are not promoting the mission of the United Methodist Church, which is making disciples, transforming the world. I feel that the connection has not paid a lot of attention to the context. And it is, for me, a high time that we refocused what we have been doing for the last so many years and begin to make the main thing, making disciples and transforming the world.
So with that in mind, what is the most important investment? If you had to pick one thing that we were going to invest resources into to grow the local church in Africa and to make sure that there's energetic, impactful ministry happening there in the churches that are already vibrant and already growing, what would that investment be?
Number one, human resource development. Number two, human resource development. Number three, human resource development.
I feel like you're saying we should focus on developing human resources.
Yes.
Just to make sure I didn't miss that any. So just to kind of summarize, that looks like education.
Education.
Training.
Training.
Capacity building.
Yes, you got it.
And making sure that we're giving those leaders that are coming up a voice and a place at the table.
Yes.
So if we were able to do that, if we're able to invest in education, training, and build capacity, in a continent of 1.3 billion people, 7 million United Methodists may not seem like a whole lot. It is a lot, but it may not seem like a whole lot in that context. If we can adequately and appropriately resource the church, the United Methodist Church in Africa, what does that impact look like down the road? If we succeed in that mission, what would the impact of the United Methodist Church on the continent of Africa be?
I think from the beginning we started by demonstrating the role of the church in the society and the place of the church in the society. Developing human resource and resourcing the church plays a very significant role in terms of developing the society. So the impact is not just going to be felt in the church, but this is an impact that we are going to see in the society. Having a healthy society, having a society that, what's the word, is able to grow and develop. So what I'm trying to say is that if we are able to invest in developing the church and resourcing the church and developing the leaders in the church, what we are doing is that the effects go back to developing the society and building the African society.
I'm going to lead you just a little bit. And in part, this comes from my understanding and knowledge of the context, such as it is. Talking about the future of Africa as a whole, and that the church's impact is wider than just the church itself. Tell us a little bit about what this current upcoming generation looks like in Africa. I know here in the U.S., I grew up, as I was growing up in the church, I kept hearing over and over again, you are the future of the church. You're the next leaders, and we were invested in our youth groups and in high school and different places to be able to become that. And I feel like that's somewhat similar to the conversation we're having now. Tell us a little bit about what the youth population in Africa, and maybe specifically in East Africa, since that's what you're most familiar with. What does that look like? So what does it mean to invest in that generation that's coming up now?
Currently, I stay in Tanzania, and Tanzania, with a population of 6 million people, has 70% young people. 70% of the 6 million people are below 30 years.
And I think you mean 60 million.
60 million people. 60 million people has 70% below the age of 30. So we are talking about a very big population of people. For a very long period of time, the young people have been told that they are leaders of tomorrow. And I think that conversation is shifting in Africa and East Africa. The young people are now taking up their rightful position as leaders. With the advancement of technology currently, young people now are involved in positions of leadership at a very early age. But that has also to be coupled with the need to be able to empower them. Training and education becomes a very important ingredient in making sure that they are able to be placed in the right place to take up those leadership roles. So in general, you realize that there is a shift now to a very youthful kind of thinking among the nations of Africa. Yeah.
It's amazing to think almost 3/4 of the population under the age of 30 really gives weight, and I don't think it's just Tanzania. I think you find similar numbers, maybe not exactly, but similar numbers in places like Uganda and Kenya and other countries around Africa, that where the society in Africa is shifting. And again, the second most populated continent on Earth is moving to a youth-filled society, and that they're going to need that guidance, and they're going to need the wisdom that the church can provide, and that they themselves can help provide that wisdom as they're discipled and as they're led. It's a statement. It's numbers I've heard before, and yet still oftentimes shock me when you think about the impact and the scope of the work that we're looking at in those contexts. The work that we really need to be doing to look at that next generation.
And if I may add, even in the church, currently when you look at the leadership in the church, you look at, for example, Tanzania, where I am currently serving, you realize that among even the clergy members, there is a crop of youthful leaders who are coming up and taking up leadership roles, of course, together with the old folks, because we need that experience as well. But the young people are now stepping forward and becoming part and parcel of the leadership roles in the church and in the community.
So as we're kind of starting to wrap up our conversation, kind of thinking back to where we started in terms of the importance of the role of church in society and the guidance that it provides, and the focus right now in the local church of needing to equip leaders and really wanting to focus on the mission of church and not get divided or sometimes distracted by some of the other conversations going on. Any kind of last comments or thoughts to wrap up the United Methodist Church in Africa, where it currently is and where it's looking at going, and how that relates maybe a little bit to the worldwide context?
Yeah, just a comment that I maybe as I wrap up is to say that United Methodist Church, just like most of the other denominations on the continent of Africa, missionary evangelized groups, unlike the African-initiated churches that we have on the continent of Africa. These are organizations that came from somewhere. United Methodist Church came to Africa through the freed slaves on the coast of the Atlantic, Liberia, and spreading to Africa. And for quite some time, the United Methodist in Africa has struggled to become an authentic African organization, so much so that a lot of what happens elsewhere, and more specifically in this context in the US, affects their mission. And also, given the fact that we are a connectional organization, it becomes a big challenge for the African church. What I would suggest is that there is need for the African United Methodist to be authentic African, define its context, understand its context, and maybe somehow run away from what is happening in other contexts that is somehow affecting ministry in that particular context. Yeah.
Checking really quickly, since we are live and online, do we have any questions or anything like that? Doesn't look like those are popping up. So I just want to wrap up and say, first of all, thank you, Bonface, for the conversation.
Thank you.
For the perspective, and realizing that it's your perspective. It may not be reflected by every United Methodist that you find in Africa, but that it is informed by your involvement in the church, your dedication and service within the church, and your educating of young and up-and-coming leaders. I would wrap up to say one of the reasons that we as the Wesley College Foundation wanted to kind of sponsor and to have this conversation is because we feel like the education of concerned, faith-filled leaders for the church and community, leaders who recognize their agency and their ability to act and their ability to affect and change their context, the ability to affect and transform and empower their own communities, their ability as young leaders to take the grace-filled theology of the United Methodist Church and of the Wesleyan Church out into the world, and specifically their context within Tanzania, East Africa, and the larger continent, is important to us. And I feel like we would agree as a foundation, we would agree as a college, that most importantly with what you said, which is developing the next generation, or in many ways the current generation of leaders, is one of the most important things that we can do. If there's anybody that has been a part of the conversation today, has been watching or listening, and you're most interested in learning how you can develop the human resource of the church in Africa, the United Methodist Church, but also in many ways the worldwide body of Christ. There's a website that's on the screen in front of you. There's always more information there about how that can happen, how you can contact us as a foundation. This is the work that we are about day in and day out, is making sure that we're equipping and resourcing the formation of servant leaders for the church and community in Tanzania and around the continent. So thank you for tuning in today, and Bonface, thank you for being part of our conversation.
Thank you, my pleasure.